Welcome to this episode of Money Matters TV. My name's Kelly Stewart. I'm the founder of The Positive Business, and I will be your host for today's episode. I am joined by John Mason, CEO
Hello.
of New
Good
Finance.
to see you again.
Good to see you as well, John. So let's see, it's been a couple of weeks since we've spoken. I think we want to talk about the stock market.
Well, we talked a little bit about this the last time we were on together, and the stock market keeps hitting new highs.
Right.
And from everything I can tell, at least before we got in here today, that probably today we're going to have, again, new highs for the three major indexes on Wall Street. And this just keeps going on and on and on.
So is this an anomaly in your world?
Well, it seems like so much is happening right now, and you almost have to look at all sorts of different markets. When we look at GDP, for instance,
Right.
that's macro. That's an aggregate number, and it tries to put everything together.
Right.
But sometimes that doesn't really tell us what the economy is taking place. And for instance, I mean, you've still got the economy. The Federal Reserve officials have come out this year, and they're expecting 2% growth in real gross domestic product,
Right.
down from 2.2%. They're expecting 1.9% in 2021, and that kind of thing. So as far as looking at the aggregate numbers are very, very mediocre.
Right.
But if you look at some other things, like the stock market, I mean, it's almost getting boring, the number of new highs that we're hitting on this regularly.
Right.
You look at the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is at 3.5%. That's the lowest in 50 years.
Right.
How can we have all sorts of problems if we've got an unemployment rate that is so low? Yes, wages haven't been going up, but again, we're talking about individual markets here that are telling us different things, and maybe, just maybe, we need to take a clue from that and say, okay, let's look at the individual markets now, not the aggregate figures
Right.
like gross domestic product.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Are there standout areas? Are there sectors of the market or just different markets that are really just standing so tall that they're overshadowing some of this?
That is the case. I mean, if you go to the stock market, for instance, the big techs, the Amazons and
I've heard of them.
Alphabets and things like that, they're a major player, a
Right.
major reason why the stocks are increasing the way they are. Financials, for instance,
Right.
recently have
Sure.
been relatively strong. So you're getting several sectors there that are changing. And one of the interesting things there is that some of the older pictures, some of the older sectors that have dominated the market before, like manufacturing and
Right.
industrials, are not playing
They're
the
not.
same role that they did. But you've got a huge change that's taken place here, because I just saw the figure the other day of all labor that's engaged labor, only 8.4% are engaged in manufacturing.
That's got to be a stark contrast to
In 1949,
historical levels.
which just to give a comparison, it
Prior
was
to
a
me.
third.
Right.
It was a third. So you've dropped from manufacturing employment being a third of all people employed in the
Right.
United States to less than 10%. That's huge. What is it saying? Well, it's, again, there's a lot of conflicting things going on
Well, it's
here.
a complex
It's
system,
complex, but again, if big tech is playing such a big role in the stock market, shareholders, investors are not dumb. And there are reasons why they're investing in these particular areas. And one could ask the question, well, if this is the way things are now, and this is the way things have been evolving in the last
Right.
5 to 10 years, maybe this is something that we should listen to, that now the old world that we knew so much,
Right.
the old world that our economic models were built around and so forth, was a manufacturing industrial base
Right.
as far as the economy was concerned. Now we've got so much more that's being produced and getting valued in terms of big tech that isn't that telling us
Right.
something?
Right.
But how do you measure the output of big tech?
Right. How do you measure that? And it also is making me think, in business they talk about that 80-20 rule, with the mix. You don't want any one client to be too big because there's some vulnerability there. So without, naming names, like does this introduce a vulnerability to the market, do you think? Or it sounds like what you're saying is there could be just a reframing of the models that we look at, and this could be the new normal. Am I hearing that possibility also? Right?
Yeah, I mean, again, here we talk about change that has taken place. The current economic recovery
Right.
is in its 11th year.
Right.
This is a historical record itself in
Right.
terms of going so long. What's changed? Well, for one thing, you don't get manufacturing cycles. I mean, when you talk about cycles
True.
in terms of the production of cars,
Very true.
or cycles in the production of steel, or things like this, that these took place cyclically.
Right.
And you got the situation where the finance affected these a great deal in terms of overextension
Right.
or
Right.
underextension and the like. Well, what's going on now? Well, you get things like these big tech companies. What's their inventory? What's
Right.
what's their investment? Their investment is in intellectual capital. It's
Right.
not in physical capital. Intellectual capital doesn't have cyclical swings to it and
Right.
the like. So maybe in this new environment that we're in,
Right.
that it's a more stable environment because that of
Those cycles
Of
have
those
been, the
cycles.
mountains and the valleys, well, maybe not the mountains, but the valleys have
Exactly.
flattened out a little bit.
Exactly. And also the manufacturing industrial companies depended so much on borrowing from the banks or borrowing from the markets and that kind of thing. What does Microsoft do as far as borrowing is concerned? What does Amazon do as far as borrowing? These people have next to no debt.
Right.
And what do they have? They have huge bank accounts.
Right.
Their cash holdings are incredible. Who finances their expansions? It's not the banks. It's
Right.
not the financial markets and so forth. They expand when they want to, and their expansion is based more on time than it is on product completion or anything
Right,
like that.
right.
So as a consequence, they are bringing things regularly to market. They're investing. I mean, you look at Jeff Bezos and what he's always announcing as far as Amazon is concerned. There's always something that's coming along.
Right.
It's not cyclical or anything.
Right.
What's coming along is based on their scheduled bringing to market agenda. And so you don't get cycles,
You
it
don't get
looks
the
like,
cycles.
the way that you used to. So consequently, you have a longer, steadier expansion.
Right.
May not, in accordance with the way we record it, it may not be as robust as some of the numbers were before, but that's another question
That's another question for another day.
for another day.
It's also a great segue because we have a question that we are actually going to revisit from one of our viewers, Richard Wells in Wayne, and he had a question for us last time you and I were together, and we wanted to revisit that because of some of the things that you're talking about today. You know, the stock market just keeps going up and up and up. So Richard's question again is, what bank stocks look good for a long-term investment? And then we'll just add on to that, given the current environment.
Well, the investment in commercial banks, to me, is kind of a difficult question right at this time. The banks are doing well, and in fact, you got J.P. Morgan Chase yesterday reported that an all-time historic high JP Morgan Chase is also earning 17% on tangible capital. Can anybody earning 17% on tangible capital? That's a remarkable performance.
Right.
Citigroup reported too, and they're just a little bit
big banks.
behind.
Right.
They're a big bank that's a little bit behind JP Morgan. They earned 12% on tangible capital. Very good results.
Who doesn't love double digits?
Yes. Well, people assume, economists have assumed kind of roughly that the cost of capital for large banks are around 10%. So if you're above 10%, you're doing well. If you're above 15%, like JP Morgan Chase is, you're doing exceptionally well.
Right.
Now, what about the rest of the country? Well, that's another story.
Okay.
Many of the banks in the rest of the country have been are more dependent, for instance, on business loans. Well, the economy's not growing real strongly, and business loans right now are lagging
Okay.
because of the lack of capital investment that's going on, and the changes in the economy.
Understood.
Well, okay, this is one thing they have to deal with. What is JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, what's Citigroup and the like,
Right.
what are they relying on? They're doing more from the consumer standpoint now, which has been the backbone of this economic recovery.
And you are setting us up for our next conversation.
Okay.
I just have that feeling. I
See,
can't wait.
You told me to prepare you for it.
Thank you very much, John.
But in the longer term sense, we've still got this financial technology that's hanging over the banking industry, and this is what concerns me about as much as anything, because the big beneficiaries of this are going to be the JP Morgan Chases,
Right.
the Citigroups and things. It's not going to be your regional or local bank that is going to really prosper from all the financial technology that's being brought
Understood.
to work right now.
Okay.
So, longer
All
run,
right.
I'm a little bit shakier about the whole banking industry itself than just the short run performances.
All right. Well, I hope that helps Richard and other viewers who also had his question in mind. And if you'd like to send in your question, here's how.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says Send Us Your Questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
Welcome back. We are so happy to have with us today Gerry Elman of Elman Technology Law. And Gerry works in the area of intellectual property, something that John Mason was just discussing recently. So Gerry, tell us a little bit about intellectual property. Help our viewers understand a kind of a broad definition of what you're working with.
Well, intellectual property is a component of the intellectual capital that John was talking about. There are various legal tools that help protect the intellectual property of any business, whether it's a small one-person shop or the large enterprises that you were discussing with John. There are various tools of intellectual property. One that's very important to identify a company and differentiate it from others is that of trademarks. So branding can be quite important, and for many companies, a major component of their value is the value of their brand.
Yes.
In addition to trademarks, we have the intellectual property of patents, where an invention will be protected by a government-granted right called a patent. And you can have patents for inventions, you can have patents that cover the way a particular product looks as a design patent. There also are a species of patents called plant patents that have to do with particular living things.
Wow.
But most people are thinking about the patents for invention that can cover a substance, it can cover a method, and it can cover some kind of a gizmo.
Right. And software?
And software happens to be the problem area with the patent
Leave
system.
it to me to identify.
No, that's a good question. Because for many years there was a concept that software really wasn't going to be protected by a patent. And so starting in the 1960s, the intellectual property component of copyright was adopted to cover the expressive aspects of writing a particular software program.
Okay.
More recently, starting in the mid-1980s, there was a transformation of approach that actually came in with the establishment of a special appellate court in Washington, D.C., called the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, that was created by Congress in 1982. And the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit started coming up with some decisions that favored the possibility of protecting software. But things have changed, and in the last 6 years or so, the Supreme Court has chosen to put its hand in and to create decisions that now raise questions as to what kinds of inventions are going to be eligible even to be considered for a patent.
What do you think was really like the driving force behind that? As you were speaking, I was thinking, even when you were talking about trademarks, right? There are, the barriers to entry are so low now for a company. So, there are so many more companies that are being started. I can only imagine the volume of trademark applications even that were put forth. But what was the impetus then to really start, I guess, for lack of a better term, taking a closer look at this, for the court to take a closer look at this and really say we have to finally, narrowly define what will be acceptable?
Well, different industries have had different approaches to the kind of intellectual property that would be helpful to them.
Okay.
The information technology industry pretty much figured that they were pretty well protected by copyrights, and if somebody else ended up getting a patent, it was a thorn in their side. So there was a lot of lobbying by the high-tech companies to get rid of the patents that really never should have been granted.
Okay.
So within the last 10 years, there have been changes by Congress in how you actually get a patent looked at as a second guess. So the creation of a particular administrative agency called the Patent Trial and Appeal Board is one that has been a thorn in the side of folks who've gotten patents, thought they could sit back and have a granted right, and yet because of procedures at the PTAB that can raise a mini trial within this administrative agency, it led to many patents being mowed down by that particular agency as a death squad. So a lot of owners of patents are quite distressed by the way that agency has been operating.
Well, sure.
This June, there was a hearing before the Intellectual Property Subcommittee of the U.S. Senate. There were 45 witnesses that were allowed to speak and to talk about the issues that were being had with the patent system. The majority of them felt that patents weren't strong enough and that the recent changes had been negative. There were also changes by decisions at the Supreme Court level asking whether or not certain kinds of inventions should not even be considered for patenting, or they called it patent eligible.
Okay.
There was some hope by many of us that the Supreme Court would take up the question once again, but Monday, January 13th, the Supreme Court turned down requests for appeal by 5 different cases that raised this question of patent eligibility. There was some hope that the Supreme Court might revise the negative effect of some of their decisions. At the moment, that's not going to take place, so it looks like there's going to be redoubled effort to lobby Congress to perhaps make the U.S. patent stronger.
Now,
Could I jump
yeah,
in?
I
Yeah,
was going to
John.
say,
Quick
this
question?
sounds like something,
Yeah, because
right?
I mean, the terminology that you used, Jerry, was guaranteed right. And that kind of stuck in me because I work a lot with young entrepreneurs and technologists and innovators and things like that. We tell them, get a patent, but act then as if it doesn't exist. Because of the fact that so much is happening so quickly these days.
Right.
And the essence is, don't wait till you completed something and you have a full package and so forth. Bring it out based on time.
Especially with the software, right?
Yeah, and if you're only 50% done, it's still the next generation. And
Right.
so the thing is, basically behind what we're telling them is, so much is dependent on time right now and not on that guaranteed right, that if they're going to perform in this marketplace and if they're going to be successful, they have to keep inventing. They keep needing to get to the next generation of the product. And the patents then really, you don't pay attention to them. You just keep on with your business.
Right.
Does that, how do you feel about, I mean, that's from where I'm coming, that's
Right.
what I see. I'd be very interested in your lawyer's opinion in terms of that.
That seems to be the real answer for keeping abreast in the fast-changing marketplace. There are different industries, though, that have different interests. The pharmaceutical industry, where you come up with one of many candidates that then turns out to be a blockbuster. That industry is very dependent on patents to provide some exclusivity, at least during the limited period of time that a patent is going to be in force. After the patent expires, then you have the generic drugs that have the possibility of entering, and that creates a very definite life cycle of particular major drugs. Because of that, the pharmaceutical companies need to keep innovating, so they always have something new in the pipeline.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that also, especially in terms of innovation, because I don't know how this would impact, and like John, curious from your legal perspective, there's so much more crowdsourcing now, and we see that companies are doing a really good job of leveraging their fans, their stakeholders, people that they don't know, across the country, to help them, for lack of a better term, co-create something. And we've seen that with, a toy manufacturer who puts it out there, we're looking for new designs, and someone can submit that, and if the design is accepted by the company, they actually will give that person a royalty of sales. In my non-legal, non-financial world, I call that baking the pie higher, right? And so how is that? Are you starting to see more of that in different industries? Maybe only some? Does it not really have a bearing on your work? But I'm just curious to learn.
Well, the traditional practice has been the invention by employed technologists. You have a company who will hire someone to invent, will have an agreement with them from day one that their compensation will be based on their creativity, and the technologist has an incentive to keep the job and keep innovating. But the concept is that individual is a full-time employee, is the inventor. Now we're coming up with something new. You have the mesh economy. You have the gig economy,
Yes.
where individuals are no longer necessarily employed by a particular monolithic company,
Right.
but now have different allegiances to different circumstances. What's important is to make sure that the fine print is consistent with everybody's expectations. Where you have something that is different from that classic model
right.
of the employed inventor, there needs to be a clear disclosure up front as to what is going to be the responsibility of the company and what largesse the company is going to be providing to others who are participating. So
Right.
there's a lot of opportunity here to create novel business models
Yes.
that then
Yeah, I
potentially
love the word
res-
opportunity.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's an opportunity to create something new.
Yeah, and Kelly and I were talking before. I mean, in terms of the fact, I mean, I can go back 10 years or so in working with these young people and everything like this. And the feeling back in 10, 15 years ago was we hang on to everything that we've got. All our knowledge, we don't let it out or
Right.
anything like that.
Right.
Today, the modus operandi is basically we're open. We're talking
Right.
about it. That keeping it inside is hurting us as well as hurting them, and that so it's better for us to talk and share information
Right.
than to hold it back. Do you see that too?
Well, I see two cross currents. The idea of patents is that there would be a write-up about what the invention is, how to make it, and how to use it. That gets published in the granted patent, and then everybody can see it. And you're not holding it within and keeping it as a secret. But when the
But
patent
that gives you
system-
the guaranteed right.
Yeah, but when the patent system becomes weaker, so that the businesses are not assured the patent is going to be there next year because
Right.
it can be challenged, a different component of intellectual property, the tool called a trade secret,
Right.
comes into ascendancy, and that puts you back into the situation of keeping the information secret within the company or the individual originator. Up until about 5 years ago, trade secrets were protected by just individual state laws. But at that time, Congress passed a Defend Trade Secrets Act that provides that you can enforce trade secrets federally. The important thing, though, is for companies to know what they need to do so that their information will remain a trade secret. And that's something that has not been as well taken into account as might be to create the value out of the secrets.
And I think part of that could be, again, as we, are possibly starting to say goodbye to the information age, right? It's mature, we'll say it that way, and we're moving more towards this network age or the network economy where we are sharing what we know to address global concerns that are, of pressing concern to all of us. So it'd be interesting to see how this all plays out as we go into our next age. And in our final minute, any word of advice or anything that you could share with our viewers before we wrap up today's show?
Well, the importance of branding to differentiate the brand new company from others is quite important, and that's one of the first things that an entrepreneur should do, which would be to take a look at what is going to be the name of the company and what are going to be the identities of particular products. In my website, elman.com, E-L-M-A-N, you'll find the answer to 6 different reasons why you should do a trademark search when you're first coming up with a brand.